Alright, so I know I usually do a lot of gaming and whatever, but today, again, we are here and, I'm gonna talk a little bit about building a fantasy world today. This is our introduction video for this topic today. If you guys never built a fantasy world, this video should be quite a helpful piece. To just give you a little bit of an idea of what to do here. So let's move on. And what exactly makes a world? Okay, so there's many things that make up a world. Many things. Okay? One of them being the main events of the world. Now, what the main events of the world could be. There's a war. There's a royal family, the leader, government, all kinds of different things that you could approach with. That much being said, a world must have some degree of nature and civilization. And the reason that is because if you have no civilizations and you have no nature, right, then there is no world. Okay, you gotta have your nature, you gotta have your civilization. Religion is a real part of the world, so varying religions is a good idea. Also, counter religions. Now, if you're wondering what a counter religion is, a counter religion is simply a religion that is against a specific religion. A good example of this is Satanism to the Christianity practice. Now, that's just an example, mind you, but this should be rather helpful for what you're thinking. Christianity and the Satanism, they are polar opposites, okay? So Satanism worships the devil, right? And Christianity is the polar opposite. So with Christianity, they worship the God that created Satan. So there's an idea there, right? You've got to have your religions. A monarchy would be a good idea. And the reason that is, the monarch usually has some type of influence on the world, okay? Whether that be a country or a continent. Or it could even be a, what's it called there, city, municipality, or even a province. So, when you consider these things, you know, there's a lot to deal with, right? So, these things, there is a lot to deal with. First off, you need the physical world. So, physical world is needed to an extent, okay? So, like, how many suns? How many moons? Is this place like Earth? Like, you gotta answer these things. Tech, okay? What level are they in tech? Now, with with this being said, you would be able to tell the timeline of which your story takes place. Now, magic being existent, that is another thing to consider. Okay, magic, how does it interact? Okay, like interact with the world. So, does magic occur on its own, or is it induced by actions or incantations? And these are the things to consider. Could it be a phrase? Okay. Or sentient. Okay, like this is also something to consider. There is such books that actually will. Here, let's just do a little bit here. There are books that actually use the idea of sentience in non-animate objects, such as swords, flora, and homes. Sometimes you'll see gems and valuables as well. To add to the depth of this world and its lore. Now, when you think about this, right, you may find that there is a lot to consider with your world. You want to talk about creatures or something. Well, let's go into creatures actually, because that probably would be a good idea. So fauna, right? What fauna is animals. Your world's animals, actually. Okay, so your world's animals, they could be mythical or legendary. Some may be based on lore or folklore, like real life folklore, such as skinwalkers, because, like, why not? Because those guys are talked about a fair bit in media lately. So, is there linear time? Does it actually all cohesively flow one direction? Does it loop? Does it have paradoxes? Are there paradoxes in this world? If so, are they a part of the plot? Right, so those are things we want to ask in this case. So, I mean, already, as you can tell in the past few minutes, we are covering a lot of the idea that we are really building from scratch, right? So, with that being said, we're building a complete thing from scratch. It's been 8 minutes, and we've already talked about the flora, the fauna, the world, the religion, the monarchs, right? Cities, right? We want capitals, provinces, and probably continents as well. Especially if you plan on going long series, right? So, especially for series rating. So, with that being said, there's a lot in this, in this all. So your cities, right? They could be populated by various races. But I guess that leads us to diverge a bit here. And we're going to put a little divvy again, because this is me changing topics a bit. Because we're going to go ahead and say that races, right? We're going to say this is fairly rule for most world building, races are a key way to dictate more lore and racial events. Racism is usually present in a world depending on locations and geography. Now, there's a lot of ways you can dictate that. You can have land masses dictate it, right? You could have religions dictate it. You could have cities that dictate it. You could have it as water bodies, right? So you can have it so it's like lakes and lakes, rivers, forests, no, or ponds. Sorry, ponds. And then we also could go like forested areas as well. Landmarks, which I guess in our world would be parks. So you would want some sort of park, right? Like, so you want pine trees. You would have to figure out if that works in your world, right? Like, maple, because why not? Variants of species. Variants of species for your races and fauna can help bring out the mystical feeling of your world. See, I cannot type today, apparently, guys. So, I mean, looking back at all this, right, after 8 minutes, we've already looked at, like, all kinds of different things. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and probably should, is legends and myths. So, with legends and myths, there's a lot to consider. I'm going to cause a little seppi here, a little div, because I'm changing topics again. So, with creating your world, you may want to consider lore and legends. Old heroes are often used. Legendary words. Oh, old. Those are another common thing you'll hear. So, I mean, I'm literally writing down the notes as I'm going through this because there is a lot to cover for introduction on world building. Does their languages dictate it, right? Like legends, for example, are they in common languages or legendary ones? And by legendary, I mean like ancient. So I'll put that in brackets for ancients. So like, do ancient tongues cause magic? For example, like Skyrim. Because the dragon shows they're a source of magic for the Dragonborn. Like Fusroga is the unrelenting force shown. So Fusroga. And that would cause a propelled force from the mouth. So ancient tongues sometimes have innate magic power. And if that's part of your world, you may want to visit that idea. Do you want to center it around the linguistics of your world, or do you want your world to be centered around the magic? Or do you want the magic to be centered around the world and its linguistics, and the religions are the religions tying into your magic? Alright, so magic. You know, let's talk a little bit about magic here, because I think with how much I've been going through these world building bits so far with you guys, I think that it might be an idea to magic. Okay, so here's magic. So magic, we already know, has an innate force of supernatural ability. That's essentially what a magic is, right? So it's something that is not normal, not physically bound. It is a supernatural world. Sometimes that could be through a talisman, right? So, like, I hold a cross, that would be a talisman in this world. So, if I was to pray with my cross, maybe I'd get an effect in the story, because real life doesn't actually do that. But to give you an example, right? If this was my talisman, my candle here, right? If I want to cast fire magic, I'd light the candle, because that would be my source. That would be my talisman. If I didn't have my talisman, I wouldn't use my magic. Um, and that's the idea of whether or not you want to use talismans or word commands. You could enchant items too, as well. So if you wanted to build a world that had enchanting for a candle, for example, um, you could enchant that candle to cause the magic, right? But enchanting may be a whole other system that actually is the backbone of your magic, right? So I guess that raises the question for you guys is enchanting in this world or a small piece? Because with that being said, if it's a small piece, accents only, right? However, when it is, if enchanting is major, we would want to see limited sources for other causes of for supernatural effects. Okay, so that being said, if enchanting is major, we would want to see limited sources for the other types of magic, right? So like words, if you're using enchanting, limit them. If you want to build magic just off of the words, that makes sense. Okay? Is there ingredients to your spell? Okay? Now, mind you, I'm taking the idea from Pagan here, Wicca, and Wiccan for the ideas, right, on that. However, you could, like lavender, salt, oil, um, dandelion, because why not? Like, these could be ingredients. However, if you have a giant, you could even go like giant toe for a possible ingredient. Like, I honestly don't see too many people using giants in their stories anymore, so figured I'd throw that out there. Herbs, do they heal, harm, or cause another effect? Is alchemy important? These are things to consider, right? Because your herbs, what they do, how they interact, do they heal, harm, or cause another effect? You may want to write those down for all of your flora, because if I have a sunflower that casts rays of light out of it when I hold it up, then I probably don't want the dandelion to do the same thing. You know what I mean? So if you're alchemizing a lot in your story, mixing herbs is a part of alchemy. Mixing bugs and spider eggs, webs and beehives and honey and wheat, just all kinds of different things, right? So, like, I don't know. I'm gonna leave that at that. I think we've covered more than enough on magic and its different things. So, with that being said, I think it would be an idea to touch basis on the idea of building guilds. Okay, so guilds. Now we know in fantasy, these guys are important. In fantasy, guilds are important, okay? And they're not necessary. But however, when you don't go with guilds in your fantasy setting, you should have some sort of monarchy, clan, or alternative to a religion, something. Um, the reason being is because guilds are like alliances. So when we look at guilds in real life, uh, I'll give you an example based on World War II here, I guess. And the alliance we had was France, England, United States, Britain. That was one side of the fight, right? And then on the other side of the fight, you had the Russians and the Japanese and the Germans, right? All those guys. And those were your two guilds, so to speak, your two war factions. Uh, Perhaps I should actually hybridize this into factions because I'm starting to realize that this kind of overlaps. So guilds and factions, they're very similar. Um, we want to see rules within these guilds and factions, if you have both. Um, Now, the reason is each should have their own oaths, choices, earning, and honor system. Alright, honor can be earned usually, so it'll be, so that's something to think of. Heroes are usually dictated by the factions or guilds. A good example of how heroes are usually dictated by the factions and guilds, look at the anime Fairy Tail, okay? And when you look at, what's his name? Pink Hair Boy. I forget his name. Pink Hair Boy, for example. He can eat fire. But he also has to follow rules. Of the guild. If not, he loses status with that guild. So, in that alone, you can kind of see that the rules will dictate how people will behave in these factions. Now, if a faction, for example, if a faction is a thief faction, they likely will be stealing a lot. Killing would probably be avoided. Okay, so I'm not expecting you guys to like how I type this all up because, well, I'm typing this out as we go, and these typos, well, usually I run my editing before I actually present writing, but I think you guys understand what I'm trying to say as I'm explaining this. I think this is clear cut so far. If you guys like what I'm writing so far, feel free to hit that subscription button and the notification bell. I'm going to be keeping on these topics of world creation and all that, and writing and how to improve your story itself. Do not actually use me as an example of grammar and spelling in this case, because, well, this is not what this is about. This is more about the mechanics. If I wanted to do like grammar and spelling thingy for you guys, I would be doing a video dedicated to that, right? So, let's see. Guilds and factions, right? Yeah, guilds and factions. So, some guilds or factions, okay, will be influenced by a monarch or higher class family. Now, the reason that happens is if you look in, for example, I'm going to use Skyrim for an example here again. If you look at the Grey Mains, I believe they were, and Battleborn, right? They are both families in the world, but they are affected by the Imperials and the Storm Cloaks. Okay, so with that being mentioned, Skyrim has the Grey Mains, Battleborn, which are Stormcloaks and Imperials. However, in the city, because of how it lays out, they are always at war with one another because they prefer one of those factions. So already, if you have a good way of laying out your factions and your guilds, they will naturally show you the opportunity for conflict, right? And you want conflict, no matter how you put it, right? In your story, there has to be some sort of conflict. Otherwise, it gets really dry, and you don't want that. So your world needs to have flavor, right? And sometimes you'll see, like, for example, factions can dictate a membership basis of qualifying. Now, what I mean by this, if we look at Skyrim, for example, again, just because it's something I know well, Skyrim, right? When you go into the Stormcloaks, right, they prefer Nords. They don't believe that the other races will provide the same love for Skyrim. So, Nords would be favored by the Stormcloaks, right? However, if Imperials took hold, no racism would be super present, though the Imperials, and again, this comes back down to the rules of your factions, right? Hate Talus, god, Nord, god of, I think it was war. So, I mean, when you look at that alone, there's already now religions coming together. It starts to build that layer, right? And I know this is supposed to be an introduction to world building, but this is introductory to me. If you want to understand a world, you gotta kind of look at each of the concepts, right? So now that we have all the way down to factions, I'm gonna go back up here. Now, some cities, right? When we look at cities, I'm gonna put cities in italics there, cities. When we look at cities, some, for example, like here, will be limited to a city local drama, right? So, some of these events will only occur in certain places. Now, when you're mastering out all of your plot, it's an idea to consider your cities, your factions, because your factions may not be present in one city. So factions, here let's keep going, may be considered only for one city, but not exist elsewhere. Right? Some factions may even be exclusive and very difficult discover, let alone join. And that's the thing. A good example of this would be the Thieves Guild in Skyrim. And the reason that is because, well, when you look at the Thieves Guild, you don't just walk in and be like, hey, let me join, right? You first have to find the Thieves Guild, and the way into the guild area, the faction area, and the faction is nowhere but that one spot. So this is a great example of, even though it's in the city itself has other factions, but that one hidden faction doesn't go anywhere but that little underground area in that city. So, with that being said, like, this also shows so many more things, right? But as we continue looking at the factions, like, as you can tell, world building is no easy chore. But don't worry, because as you get through this set of questions and all of these things that we've talked about, not only do you wind up adding value to your read, but you add value to your content. If you were to say talk about a faction, right, and never touch base on it, then that kind of empties the presence of that faction, right? So, for example, like the Hunger Games, right? Here, the Hunger Games. I actually just watched that the other night, so this is pretty fresh in my head. Has 13 districts. Okay, District 13. Now, District 13 was actually never really mentioned in the first book. Like, they talked about the uprising, they talked about what the district did. In the movie, at least. See, in the book, they actually talk about District 13 causing a rebellion and them being burned to the ground. But in Hunger Games, they didn't talk about the 13th district in the movie, right? Not until the sequel brings the presence of the Mockingjay to light. And that 13 still exists. Right? So, with that being said, the only reason that works in the book and not the movie is because District 13 is not mentioned in the movie. So, they took a key aspect of the series, that extra foretelling plot that shows the true arc and kind of foreshadows a bit, has been diffused from the movie. That level of having your faction mentioned and then never brought out kind of hinders, right? They talk a lot about District 13 in the tail end of the Hunger Games, the book, but they don't talk about it in the movie. So movie adaptation kind of foobarred that. In the sequel, however, they unload all of it. So in the sequel, they unload all of what happens with District 13, why the Hunger Games came to be. And that was a cool way of doing it in the movie. But in the book, right, they already started to know that they already understood what was at risk. And so when you look at the main character, they knew about 13 and that it was never there, but they had existed underground this whole time. So when you look at things like that, you gotta understand to make it so some factions are actually secret societies, right? So I guess that brings this next part is faction or guild a secret society. Now, why I say that is important is because secret societies, they usually aren't ones to be in the bright light. They're not usually ones to be forthcoming about everything. So your faction should be either in the spotlight or in the background, right? One of the two. Can't be both. A secret society could not be a secret society if everybody knew what that secret society was doing, right? So um, they need to have their own codes. They need to have their own way of hiding things, even in the brightest light. So that's why you got to look at that when you're building a faction as well. Is do you want them to be a secretive faction? Do you want them to be a part of the spotlight? Are they celebrities? Are they criminals? So criminal or celebrity, right? Like these are the kinds of things that help build the idea of what your faction's like. Um, so with that being said, I think we've covered a whole lot today for an introduction on world building. We're about 30 minutes in now, so I don't know how much more I could add to this for an introduction, guys. I think this is a fairly good introduction so far, but I don't want to make this too long of a video for you guys to watch because I know I could ramble on forever on all of these topics and keep on going and going and going and break it down. Like, for example, Legends. I'm going to have to do a dedicated video on that because, like, doing Legends, that's almost like writing a backstory, but you're writing another story altogether. You're pretty much writing a whole other short story. So I'm going to make another video talking in depth on all of these topics more and like how to build your own land masses. Um, talk about, you know, paradoxes, for example. Like, is your main character the god? But if your main character dies, then the god dies, so the world will never exist. Like Dragon Ball, for example, because Goku is Broly in the long run, I believe, if I remember correctly, unless they changed the direction of the anime since I watched it. But as far as I understood, Goku was Broly. Anywho, um, he, knowing your countries, your continents, your religions, like I think this is definitely a good way of introducing you guys to what it is that builds your world. Um, with that being said, okay, I'm going to bring myself a little bit bigger for you guys this time. Here we go. And I'm going to say this much, guys. I love making these kinds of videos. I honestly think that with these videos, people can learn a lot, right? Like, you can learn to write, you can learn to build your worlds. You don't have to be a university degree person to write a story. Um, it can help when you're writing research-based stuff, like factual stuff. But if you're just writing fiction, right, you don't need a lot. You just need to make sure you're consistent. And that's the major thing, guys. So when you build your world, like what we're doing in the back of this here, I'm going to shrink me down again. But if we build our worlds, right, and we're building all of this detail, right, we don't want to forget about that, okay? We don't. And the reason we don't want to forget about that is because if we do, then our world no longer stays consistent and then plot holes happen. Like, for example, Harry Potter's biggest plot hole being is Harry Potter, for example, is a Horcrux. But he wasn't made a Horcrux. And a Horcrux has to be deliberately made. So there's a plot hole, right? Like, they made those rules for their magic system and broke those rules. Because a killing curse should not enchant an item. That's not how that worked. But they broke their own rule. So this is why I say it is definitely an idea to take your extra little bit of documentation and a little bit of extra time with your words and your Word document, or in my case, LibreOffice, to make sure you have notes like what I've been writing out this whole time. That way, if you want to talk about something, you can go and look at it later and pull it up, because that in itself is a great writing tool, okay? Like, you having your own notes is like having a study guide for your own world. And you're not making a study guide for people, but if you hit a writer's block and you want to know how to fix it, you gotta ask the 5 W's. Well, what am I gonna ask the 5 W's about? Okay, well, let's take a look at my story. Let's take a look at these notes over here, you know? And that in itself is how a lot of writers will beat writer's block, is they'll look at their books, they'll look at the chapter, they'll look at the outline if they have one, and if you're a pantser, they won't, but if you have your world building notes as a pantser, you can still sit there, look at that part, and be like, okay, let's break it down. Who, what, when, where, why. And then, finally, how. And that's when the writing begins again, and you resume your chapter, because you build off of those questions. Those questions will always get you out of a writer's block. Okay, and it will also be used regularly throughout the rest of world building. And I hope that this has been very informative for you guys. Again, I suggest that you hit the subscription button, or the subscribe button, and the notification bell. Subscribe should be over here. There's going to be another video over there. Some this part. I'm always awkward at this part. Over over there. Okay, there's going to be another video over there for you guys. And um, yeah, so click the video to learn more about writing with me, and with me. And up here is where you can subscribe. So there's also a Stripe link in the description and pinned comment if you guys feel that this is informative enough where you would like to donate. So thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and feel free to come back anytime. I'm going to be posting more videos about writing and the intricacies. And let's get mastering our craft, right?